So I usually start every one of my instructional sessions with a set of learning goals. And today our learning goals are going to be hopefully pretty kind of explanatory based on the workshop's description. But by the end of today, you should be able to access resources and support for evidence synthesis projects. You should be able to distinguish between major types of evidence synthesis, determine what method is right for your research idea, and articulate the very general steps in a more methodological evidence synthesis project, like a systematic review or a scoping review. So just checking in with everyone. I'd love to see thumbs up, or if you have your camera on today, feel free to, make a facial expression. But how are we feeling about those learning goals? Do those feel manageable? Do they feel like things that we can accomplish today? Are there things that we would like to see on there that we expected to see? Awesome. Thank you all. I appreciate it. I love the new addition of all the emojis. Yes, Professor Kim. Oh.
I think it's a mistake. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Sometimes my hand's on for the whole meeting and I don't realize until it's over. And then I'm like, oh, that was, the equivalent of being in a classroom with your arm up the whole time. No worries. Okay, awesome. Thank you all so much for responding to that. So I want to start with our first learning goal, which is to access resources and support for evidence synthesis projects. Your kind of first line of defense for getting resources and support is me. I am a kind of the only person to my knowledge that provides systematic and scoping review services here at Rutgers outside of the health sciences, right? The RBHS folks do a wonderful job with the health sciences, but I'm kind of your go-to gal if you are looking for support in the social sciences. So you can reach out to me via email. I will drop my email in the chat. Move my, and you can also book appointments with me. Using my special calendar link, you can see kind of the slots that I have available. You can book them pretty far in advance. It syncs with my Outlook calendar, so it's usually very up to date. So please feel free to take advantage of that as well. I know some of you I've met in both of these ways already. I also want to talk a little bit and kind of give you a prequel to what this workshop series entails. So I arrived at Rutgers in August, and prior to my coming here, there were not as many folks offering kind of systematized evidence synthesis services for the social sciences here. And that's primarily because, as probably you all know, these methods have become really popular in recent years, and academic libraries, especially those that focus on the social sciences, are kind of struggling to keep up with that demand and kind of structure things that really support folks. So that's why I'm really excited to be having this workshop series. I also am really excited to get all of your perspectives. I think we have a really nice mix of folks across different disciplines here today. And your perspectives and your questions and your participation, I'm going to do a little teeny tiny, 1-minute survey at the end of this session. All of that will really help us as librarians become more informed about how we can support your needs, what your needs are. And I'm hoping to be able to share that with some of my colleagues at other libraries so that we can really start to build more systematized services for the social sciences in this vein. So thank you all for being here. The workshops, again, there are 4 of them that I'm offering this semester. This is the first one and the most general. The next 2 are more of a deep dive into systematic reviews and then scoping reviews. And then the last one is a specific session on crafting a search strategy, which could be like its own full semester class probably. But we will go ahead and, attempt to do it in 90 minutes. So if you're interested in any of those, you can find the link where you found the link for this particular workshop. I'm happy to share those links at the end of our session as well. All right, so let's jump into some evidence synthesis. I'm expecting that a lot of you will come to this session with kind of varying experience and expertise with an evidence synthesis project. I know some of you, Jordan, for example, I've worked with Jordan specifically on a scoping review. So, and a couple other folks I know have reached out to me via email to ask questions as they've had a review in progress. So, I think some of you might be coming in having done one of these. Some of you might be coming in just with curiosity about what these methods entail. So just to kind of get a sense of where we're at, I would love for you to share in the chat with me, how would you define the concept of evidence synthesis, just based on your experience so far with the concept? And if you prefer to share verbally, that's also great. An in-depth summary. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of putting a complex thing into a very understandable phrase. Yeah, thanks, Arlana. Other thoughts? Jordan says, drawing key conclusions from various sources on information on a topic. Yes, very nice. To find out what we know and what we do not know beyond a simple summary based on empirical evidence of certain quality. Yes, I love the certain quality aspect. I think that gets at what makes it what makes a systematic review specifically a systematic review. Yeah, very nice. Awesome. These are great. All right. I pulled a quote that I think really summarizes what a lot of you said in the chat, which is, it's a quote from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine that says that evidence synthesis is a type of research method that allows researchers to bring together all relevant information on a research question. Professor Kim talked about identifying gaps in knowledge. Other folks talked about drawing key conclusions, which kind of points towards establishing an evidence base, right? So this paragraph kind of sums up something that's really complex, right? In very simple terms, we think about evidence synthesis being the gathering of information, the identifying of that information as worthy of inclusion or exclusion in our summary of that information. And then kind of the drawing of the conclusions of that information as kind of synthesized across various methods. So, this is a nice kind of paragraph description, but I also want to highlight that evidence synthesis is also a blanket term for a lot of different methods, right? We're going to talk specifically about several of them today. But there are many, many, and those look different than they do in the health sciences versus the social sciences. These methods originated in the health sciences to kind of form the basis for more informed and evidence-based practice. But the methods have moved to social sciences where they're still used for evidence-based practices, but they're also used to like some of you said, identify gaps in the literature or evaluate a certain intervention. There are a lot of different ways that they can be used. Lastly, I want to point out that evidence synthesis can be really overwhelming. You'll find out later, or perhaps you already know, that these methods can take up to 18 months to complete. They are not particularly quick, unless you're doing a rapid review, which we'll talk about in a moment. So they can be overwhelming because they're intricate, they take a lot of steps, they require a lot of expertise, and they take a lot of time. So if you're coming into this feeling overwhelmed, if that's the reason why you're joining us today, I want to just validate that that's a normal feeling to have, because they are overwhelming. And I personally can attest that when I got started in this particular field, I felt completely overwhelmed, and still do sometimes. So especially when you're starting a project. So that's just to say that that's a valid feeling to have. And hopefully by the end of this workshop, at least some of that overwhelm will kind of dissipate. One of the main tools that I would like to point you to before we move forward is the library guide that I've created for evidence synthesis in the social sciences. Let me drop the link in the chat. Oops. So this LibGuide is something that I made when I was kind of mid-semester last semester and was getting a lot of requests for help with evidence synthesis projects. And it was kind of the first attempt that I made to create more structure around how folks are, or how the library supports folks who are working on systematic reviews and scoping reviews. It's kind of the guide that I wish I had had when I started working on these things. So it contains a lot of information, a lot of which we're going to go through today, but I just wanted to point this to you. We talk about types. There's step-by-step guidelines for both scoping reviews and systematic reviews. We have a whole tab that is all different resources that I've amassed, and they're kind of in categories relating to what stage you're in and what kind of review type you're doing. I'm also going to post the workshops, and I'll probably post the videos here as well. So this is kind of your one-stop shop. If you want to get started and feeling confident after the workshop today, this is your place to go, and we'll be referring to it throughout this session as well. All right. So I just want to check in. Are there any questions so far? I know we've kind of barely scratched the surface. Okay. If you do have questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat or raise your hand. So let's move on to types of reviews. I want to start this by doing a little bit of an activity. We're going to compare two reviews. One is a traditional narrative or literature review, and the other one is a systematic review. They might not be your disciplinary area, so feel free to think more about how the authors are approaching the content rather than evaluating the quality of the content. But please skim the abstract, the methods, or in the narrative review, it's the conceptual framework and the discussion. And I will put the PDFs right in the chat. Won't you? Sorry, I'm having trouble dragging my PDF to the, let's try this way. There we go. Here's one. And here is the other. Okay, and let's take about, let's say 7 minutes. So we'll return at 4:32. I know that's a very specific number, but again, just a skim of the abstract, the methods, and the discussion portion. Can everybody see those PDFs? Okay, great. Let me know if you have any issues accessing them. And feel free to turn your cameras off if it's weird to just be staring at each other while we're reading. just do a quick time check. How are we doing, everyone? Do we need more time than just a minute more? Doing okay? Okay. Let's just do one more minute then, but if anyone needs a little more time, let me know. All right, let's go ahead and come back together. So I have some questions for you all. Can you all still see the slides okay? Everything looking all right from that angle? Okay, awesome. So we compared two articles. One was a narrative literature review and the other one was a systematic review. So in the chat or out loud, what were some of the differences between the methods? What did they, what did you notice between the systematic review and the literature review? What were some differences? Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point, Dr. Kim. The systematic review is completely replicable. And the reason that it's replicable, right, is because they're completely transparent about their methods. Yes. Nevi says the systematic review reported very specific details of their search. Yes. Yeah, that becomes very important. YG says the length. Yeah, the length was very different. What about similarities? What were the similarities between the two? It's harder to think of these, even though they both have review in the name. It's harder to think of them, right? They're kind of distant cousins. Yeah. Yes. Dr. Kim says not answering a specific question, right? What about how the reviews drew their conclusions? Were there differences? Were there similarities? I made my partner listen to this workshop last night. He is not a social scientist, he is a physicist, but I made him do it anyway. I listened to his physics talks. It's kind of our academic deal, but he, skimmed the articles as well. And one thing he said that I thought was really interesting was the fact that the literature review came in with more of an argument pre-constructed, right? Oftentimes literature reviews are to back up a certain point that you have already decided you're trying to make, right? Whereas the systematic review kind of keeps that as a void, right? And the void is filled by the evidence that is found and summarized. So I thought that was really interesting too. I appreciated his thoughts on that. Awesome. Well, thank you for indulging me in reading those. I think that it's really useful to see some examples of these and how they look different, because when we're in the midst of reading one, whether it's for a class or because we're trying to write our own review, it's a little bit less, maybe there's a little less time to kind of sit and think about and process what the differences are. So I'm glad that we were able to do that together. So this is kind of my summary of how different review types differ from each other. They kind of exist on a spectrum. And this is an image that I adapted from the University of British Columbia libraries, which puts, the literature / narrative review on one end of the spectrum and the systematic review and meta-analysis, which we'll talk a little bit about what a meta-analysis is in a bit, on the other end. And the spectrum kind of goes from broad to narrow in terms of your research question. It goes from non-reproducible or non-following a standard type of methods to very reproducible, very transparent methods, and subjective, right? So the idea that you're kind of filling in evidence for a preordained argument versus objective, where you really have no kind of stake in what the evidence says, except to identify quality evidence and summarize it for others, right? So this is in our library guide as well, this diagram, because sometimes when I'm trying to think about what review type is best for a project that I'm helping with, it can be really useful to look at this and look at examples. So in our library guide, there is a type of evidence synthesis page. So it's got this nice diagram, but then it's also got the characteristics of each type of review and a quality example of each. So that way, again, when you're like, okay, what's best for my project, or I'm forgetting, what's the difference between a scoping review and a systematic review, which we'll get to in a minute. You can kind of go to this and see some quality examples as well. And I tried to pick disciplines across the social sciences so that you can, regardless of what field you're in, you can see something that reflects your discipline. Okay. So I kind of segued myself into this next part, but what about the difference between a systematic review and a scoping review? This is a question that I think I get the most from folks when they're starting a review process is which one do I choose and why are they different? How are they different? I don't understand. So I made a little diagram here for y'all, a little table. The biggest difference is not in the methods per se. A scoping review still is very systematic in its searching, right? It still tries to be transparent, comprehensive, reproducible. You could still hopefully follow along with a systematic review's methods and get the exact same search results, come to the exact same conclusions. The difference is in the aims. So where the aim of a systematic review is to synthesize all available evidence for evaluation or information on policy or practice. A scoping review is often more about understanding the scope, which, that makes sense. The scope, the size, the nature of the evidence that's out there. A lot of times the scoping review is a precursor to a systematic review because sometimes you don't know if there's enough information on your topic to really actually write a systematic review on it. A scoping review, that's why it kind of is more towards the subjective on that spectrum that we looked at a moment ago, because you can kind of use a scoping review to discuss whether or not there's enough literature on a topic to kind of frame you doing original research on a topic, right? So there's a lot of different objectives that come into play rather than a systematic review where there's usually a very clear-cut reason to be writing it, and it's a very objective reason. But the other elements look very similar, right? You do transparent searches, you make them completely reproducible so that someone else could potentially do them and get the same results. It's recommended you do them in teams, and they can take a long time. There are a lot of sources throughout this presentation. So, if you want more methodological guidance or comparisons between different review types, I've cited some pretty high quality reviews written by librarians who break it down really, really nicely. And all these sources that I've cited in this presentation are also in the LibGuide. Let's talk other types of reviews. So I mentioned meta-analysis. We have that as the kind of far end of our spectrum here. Meta-analyses are the use of a specific statistical method to summarize the results from all quantitative evidence, right? So it's the evaluation of quantitative evidence across all different studies that you've identified. They often accompany systematic reviews that review quantitative studies. So they're, completely objective because it's statistics. Then there's umbrella reviews, which exist because we've produced so many reviews on different topics. So that is a review of reviews, which is, a fun concept. I have not helped with one of those yet, but I would be definitely very interested too. And then there's rapid reviews. So rapid reviews use all of the methods of a systematic review, but they do it in a much shorter timeline, usually with less of a team approach. They can be helpful when evidence is emerging very quickly on a topic, right? So like during COVID-19 early days, there were a lot of rapid reviews that were conducted because folks needed the information on evidence-based practice. in a really timely manner. I don't see rapid reviews or umbrella reviews used as much in the social sciences, but I think it's still really valuable to know these methods and understand what the differences are from the systematic and scoping reviews that we see more often. All right, so that is different types of reviews. Does anyone have any questions about those? Oh, so Lorraine, I'm sorry I missed your question. Can you do a rapid scoping review? Yeah, you could do a rapid scoping review. Yeah, you could apply the rapid methodology to any kind of more traditional existing review method. Yeah. Aubrey, do you have a question?
Yeah, could you apply these different types of reviews to, like, let's say, like reviewing a book for a publication?
I don't think so. You could apply elements of the steps of these reviews, and we'll talk about the steps here in a moment. You can incorporate books into your, sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. Are you asking like how, like, could you write a book using these methods? Is that what you're
Oh,
saying?
no. Like, as in, like, you you get a book and you read the book and you write a review about it.
Oh, okay. Not really. You could include the book as one source for your review, but these reviews usually gather sources from all different places and then synthesize all of them into one body of evidence. So the book could be included, and oftentimes people do include books or book chapters. We call that gray literature. But it wouldn't necessarily be just about the book, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, cool. No problem. Other questions? Okay, awesome. All right,
I have a
so
question. You mentioned that the rapid reviews are not commonly used in social sciences. That's correct. And why do you think that is so?
I think part of it is because the social sciences are adapting these methods from the health sciences, and rapid review is a newer method in the health sciences. So I think it hasn't quite trickled over yet. The other reason is that I think a lot of times social scientists are evaluating interventions that don't necessarily need to, the evidence doesn't necessarily need to be summarized rapidly. And I think the third reason is, and that's kind of connected to the second reason, is that they really increase the risk of bias because you're not kind of doing your due diligence in the team setting, especially when you do your article screening, which we'll talk about in a moment. So I think people tend to shy away from them. You know, they're harder to get published, things like that, because you just are increasing the risk of bias. Yeah, good question. Other questions? Okay. All right, so let's talk about the elements of a systematic review or a scoping review. So I want to preface this by saying that these methods, there is a lot more nuance than what we're going to be able to cover in the next 45 minutes. But I wanted to include this because I think it's really important when you go out and read a systematic review or scoping review, or you join a team that's starting a review, to be able to understand what folks are talking about when they talk about elements of the methods. And there are enough similarities. You know, we discussed the aims are different between a systematic review and a scoping review, but there are enough similarities in common elements of the reviews that I think it's beneficial to know what those elements are and be able to think about them and talk about them and read about them with confidence. So that's why we're going to jump into the elements and the steps of these reviews in a very general sense. So first, I want to talk about the major players in systematic and scoping review land. The first one is the Joanna Briggs Institute. It is an Australian, I believe, institute that produces a really excellent manual. I'll drop that manual in the chat. Really excellent, really comprehensive evidence synthesis manual. They have their own journal, they have their own library. It's very health science focused, but the advice, especially in the manual, is extremely sound, and I use it frequently. It was kind of the first manual that I read, and I refer to it often still. The second thing that I recommend taking a look at, and that we will actually take a look at together in a moment, is called PRISMA, which I'm not going to pretend I know what that stands for. Preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses. So this is kind of a baseline checklist that has become almost required to do a quality systematic review or scoping review. There are separate checklists for each review type. And they've become pretty essential. You know, the PRISMA framework is really not something I would recommend straying away from, regardless of what discipline you're in. And we'll actually take a look at the checklist in a moment. And then lastly, we have the Cochrane Group. The Cochrane Group has been producing systematic reviews for their library in health sciences for a long, long time. They're definitely kind of one of the foundational members of evidence synthesis as a practice. They also produce an excellent manual, and you'll hear their name bandied about a lot. They own Covidence, which is one of the screening tools that's become very, very popular in systematic and scoping reviews. We'll talk about screening as a later step. So all of these three are kind of the big three that you'll hear thrown about quite a bit, and are nice to be familiar with. But let's also talk about some more social science specific resources. The first one is called the Campbell Collaboration. The Campbell Collaboration is a partner of the Cochrane Group, which we just talked about, but they are kind of the social science arm of the Cochrane Group. So they produce reviews. They have a lot of webinars. They're kind of geared towards folks that have been accepted for publication in a Campbell journal, but they're free to access, and the advice is really sound, you know, regardless of if you're publishing with their organization or not. So highly recommend checking them out. The other book that I would like to recommend is called Systematic Reviews in the Social Sciences, A Practical Guide. We do have it in the library. I just bought us a second copy because the first copy somebody checked out, which they should. I'm really happy it's been checked out, but I figured we needed another one. There's no ebook version, unfortunately. So we now have 2 physical copies in the library. So highly recommend checking that out as well, if you have the desire. I think it's a really fantastic, really direct guide to systematic reviews. It doesn't use a lot of jargon. It doesn't kind of assume anything about where your skill level's at. It's really useful for anyone who's, you know, regardless of if you've done 10 reviews or if you're just considering reading one, you can get a lot from it. So highly recommend that as well. Okay, we're going to move into another activity. And the activity we're going to do now is to review either the PRISMA systematic review checklist, which I'll drop in the chat, or the PRISMA scoping review checklist. So choose one, you know, pick the one that feels most relevant to things that you might be working on. And we'll do maybe 5 minutes. Actually, we'll do like 3 minutes with those. They're pretty bare bones. And again, PRISMA is kind of the minimum set of standards checklist that folks follow when they are writing a review. Everybody access those links okay? Okay, cool. Come back at 4:53. All right, everyone, let's go ahead and come back together. Hopefully you got to spend a little time with either the Prisma systematic review checklist or the Prisma scoping review checklist. So first question for you all, are there elements on the checklist that surprised you? And maybe to broaden that even more, are there elements that felt unfamiliar to you? And I'll go ahead and lump that second question in there as well. Are there elements on the checklist that were familiar? Oh, great. That's awesome, Lorraine. You're proposing a scoping review right now. Very cool. So you're probably intimately aware of Prisma at this point. Are you coming to the scoping review workshop? Awesome. Okay, great.
Yep, already signed up.
Yes. Yay, looking forward to it. So Natalie asks, how does the Prisma review checklist align with other scoping review frameworks such as ARC-C and O'Malley? Great question, Natalie. So if you have been around folks that are working on scoping reviews, or if you've been interested in conducting one, you might have encountered ARC-C and O'Malley's article on scoping reviews. ARC-C and O'Malley were the first people to really put into writing the methodology of a scoping review. In my experience, Natalie, they do not contradict each other much. Prisma is what I recommend to folks because it's much more recent and updated than ARC-C and O'Malley is. ARC-C and O'Malley is definitely a foundational piece that everyone should read when they're starting a scoping review, because it really kind of articulates what the review is, why you do one, can help you determine if it's the right review type for you. But the actual methodological guidance is really dated. So I think in the article, it talks about going to the library and finding databases on CD, which is why I kind of recommend that and some other, reasons is why I recommend reading it. Definitely you'll gain something from it, but kind of taking it with a grain of salt. So Prisma, I would say, it's kind of the more evolved, more up-to-date cousin of ARC-C and O'Malley. Yeah, great question. Other questions or thoughts? Oh, awesome. Okay, I'm glad that's helpful. Cool. All right, so now you're familiar with Prisma, so we're going to move on to the actual steps in a review. So again, these are very general, very broad, much more nuanced in practice, but we'll get you familiar with different common activities that are involved in these more standardized review methods. We'll start with the team, then we'll talk about registering protocol. We'll talk about inclusion and exclusion criteria of your studies. We'll talk about searching databases, screening the studies that you've identified, and then lastly, extracting your data. So let's start with our team. Our teams are formed because we want to avoid bias during study selection. So basically, once you decide to conduct a review, you will devise an advanced search strategy. You will plug it into the databases that you choose, and then you will pull all of the articles that are yielded from that strategy into a screening tool of your choice. And then what will happen is that you will go through and look at the titles and the abstracts of all of the articles. And the reason that it's important for there to be a team doing that screening process is because folks might have different perspectives on what should be included and what should be excluded. And if you are a single person doing that work, it's much more likely that you might miss something that really could be valuable to the kind of overall evidence synthesis that you're trying to do. So in a lot of screening tools, for instance, Covidence, which we'll talk about in a bit, you can have like you basically do a vote system. So like one teammate votes yes, another teammate votes no, and then your third teammate kind of maybe acts as the tiebreaker, right? So it doesn't eliminate bias, you know, because we're human beings, but it helps kind of mitigate the effects of it. The other reason it's important to do things in teams is because we all have different expertise areas, right? This is from the University of Edinburgh. They say that the highest quality review will have inputs from subject matter experts, folks who understand systematic review methodology, folks that understand information retrieval, like librarians, and then, you know, maybe other aspects depending on your research question. So a diverse team is very important to a quality systematic or scoping review. Once you have decided to write a review, you've chosen your research question, you write what's called a protocol. The protocol is kind of your game plan of your review. It's your proposal. It's your kind of layout of what you are anticipating are going to be the methodological steps. You also register your protocol. And in our LibGuide, there are many different resources for where to register, how to register, what kind of considerations to take. So there's one for scoping reviews and for systematic reviews. The reason that you register your protocol is because it's important to tell your scholarly community that you are writing a review on this topic. Before you even write your protocol, you should be searching the registration databases of protocols, of which, you know, are the same links that you would use to register your protocols, to make sure that folks aren't already writing one in that field, right? Because the point is to summarize and, you know, the evidence on a given topic. It's kind of redundant to it with an extremely reproducible method, right? So it's redundant for several people from several different teams to be writing reviews at the same time. So that's important as well. Before you do any searching, you develop what are called inclusion and exclusion criteria. So inclusion and exclusion criteria are the elements of the studies that you find that are going to either possibly bring them in for synthesis or exclude them from synthesis. This chart, I think it's from University of Melbourne, really breaks it down super well. You might think about date, right? If you're thinking about writing about the effects of online school during the COVID-19 pandemic, you're obviously not going to want to look at things from before 2020. Exposure of interest, right? So is there a particular exposure or intervention that you want to look at? Are there reviews out there, or sorry, are there studies out there that might have pulled other exposures in that you know, might not want to be looking at, but that might come up in a search? Is there a particular language you want to stick to? Is there, you know, a specific population of participants that you want to be looking at? Do you want to just look at sources that have been peer reviewed, right? So there's many different elements, and you and your team should really sit down and determine those elements before you even start searching for studies. And a quick note here, you know, I mentioned peer review a minute ago and whether or not you want to find sources that are peer reviewed. Sources outside of the scholarly peer reviewed literature are called gray literature. Gray literature is anything that's not formally published in a journal article format. So Aubrey mentioned books. Books would fall under gray literature. This is, you know, things like conference presentations, dissertations, book chapters. If you're looking at like a government report or a think tank or an NGO or, you know, anywhere on the internet, all of those would count as gray literature. Again, this is something you want to talk about with your team, whether or not you want to include gray literature. Oftentimes it's very valuable, but sometimes it's maybe not within the scope of the resources that you have, or your research question doesn't really lend itself to needing gray literature. You know, all of those are reasons to either include or exclude it. In the LibGuide, again, there is a tab for in both the scoping review and systematic review sections. There's a tab for places to go to search for gray literature if you do decide that it's needed. So those are there as well. All right, then we get to the big exciting part, which is actually searching for the sources that you're going to screen and determine whether they should be included or excluded in your review. So in the chat, I'd love to know what some of the strategies are that you all use when searching for articles in a database. And there are no wrong answers here. If you're like, I typed the keywords in, that's great. If you use some fancy method, that's great. Whatever you do. Web of Science. So yeah, Dr. Kim says Web of Science. Yeah, I use Web of Science a lot. I feel like it's very user-friendly and intuitive. Nicole says keywords, usually try to limit to the last 10 to 20 years. Yeah, so that's one of those filters. That would be an inclusion criteria for you, Nicole. YG says a Boolean search on PubMed. Is everyone familiar with what Boolean operators are? Cool. Awesome. If you are not, oh, Natalie thumbs that up as well. Yes, awesome. If you are not, I can send you some resources on some search strategy things, including Boolean operators. Aubrey says using keywords that have to do with the subject, usually using a library database. Awesome. Yes, choosing the databases through the library, understanding what your keywords are from your search strategy or from your research question. That is very important as well. Yes, excellent. So those are awesome strategies. And basically all of them come into play when it comes to devising a search strategy for a systematic review. So this example on the left of our slide here is a very comprehensive, very quality search strategy from a protocol that was written in a social science. It's in Social Science Protocols, which is a new open access journal that I would highly recommend checking out. But this is kind of what a search strategy looks like when you end up publishing. So we can see that this has a lot of keywords, it has a lot of Boolean operators, it has a lot of punctuation. We even see what are called proximity operators, which are the ADJ3s here. Can everybody see on that? On the second line here, there's one, ADJ3. So that is syntax for the database to tell it to find the words well within 3 words of the word literacy. So you could do ADJ2, and that would be within 2 words. You could do 4, and it'd be within 4 words. And those are very powerful as well. So there are a lot of elements to crafting a search strategy, which is why I am doing a whole separate workshop on those. But it comes down to understanding the databases that you're searching. And if you need help identifying the databases that you want to search in a review, I'm absolutely happy to help with that. But different databases have different rules, right? So this ADJ3 proximity operator will look different. You know, some databases use the word near to define a proximity. So you have to know how to translate your search strategy across different databases. You have to know how to use Boolean operators. You have to know how to use different fields. Like a lot of times you want to just search the title and the abstract rather than the full text. And then lastly, you have to understand subject headings and keywords. So, you know, how do those two things differ? And again, if this is something that sounds like, you know, you're ready for this step in crafting a search strategy, I would highly recommend coming to the 4th workshop, which is all about search strategies as well. So once you have your search strategy, you collect all of the articles in either a reference manager like EndNote or a tool like Covidence, which is the Cochrane Group's production, and you start screening. So you remove duplicates first, because it's likely that when you're searching across many databases, you're going to have articles that appear in more than one. So you remove all of those and then you record that number, and then you screen the articles. So the first time you screen the articles, you just remove anything that looks irrelevant based on the title and the abstract. You don't have to justify your decision at this point, as long as you as a team come to a consensus. And then you do a second pass, which is where you get the full text for each of the articles that are still in the running, and you read them fully. And that's where a team helps a lot too, right? Because that takes a long time. If you decide to exclude studies at that point, you have to record your justification. Because again, we should be thinking about how transparent, as transparent as we can possibly be, right? So someone could follow every single method in our paper as instructions and come to the same conclusions that we did, right? So justifying your decisions at this step is very important. That's screening. Part of the Prisma toolkit that's quickly becoming pretty essential to every review is to include a flow diagram where you talk about the different numbers that you got at each stage in this screening process, right? So you talk about the number you got initially when you searched, you talk about the number you got after you deduplicated, you talk about the number that you got after that first pass, after the second pass, and then what you actually included, and the reasons for why you included or excluded things during that second stage where you read everything. And then lastly, you extract. I didn't write much about this because data extraction looks very different based on the kind of data that you're looking at, right? So if you're using, if you're looking at mostly qualitative studies, you might use something like in vivo or deduce to do your extraction. If you're looking at more quantitative stuff, you might be working with doing a meta-analysis on top of your systematic or scoping review. There are a lot of resources, again, in our LibGuide for different data extraction methods, right? So I've even included some example forms that folks use, and all different tools. So under this, what extraction method should I use? We talk about the benefits and limitations of each type as well. So that comes in handy also. Okay, so those are the quick and dirty steps to doing a review of some sort of standardized quality. Any questions? Natalie?
Yes, thank you. So kind of a minor point here, but I think it's nice that you have the slides over there on the left. So like I think slide 31, the flow chart. So I've seen that in systematic reviews, but I haven't seen this particular replication in scoping. I mean, not that I've seen all the scoping reviews in the world, but is it? And I've seen like flow diagrams used in scoping reviews. Is it becoming standard to use this particular diagram in scoping as well? So your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's becoming standard. I wouldn't say it's the standard yet, which is why you might have not seen it. This flow chart in particular is a very detailed one. So a lot of the flow charts that you'll see won't have boxes for like the two different passes of screening. It won't have reasons for, sorry, my cat's meowing. I apologize if you hear that. It's her dinner time. It won't have reasons for exclusion or inclusion. But I would say with a scoping review, I always say, even if it's not the standard, err on the side of reproducibility. Right. So the more information, the more transparent that you can be, the more quality your review is going to be. Yeah, that's a great question, Natalie. Thank you. Hope I answered it. Yeah, Dr.
I
Farmer.
want to go back to the point of great literature.
Mm-hmm.
So in this process, where should I put my decision about eliminating the great literature? Should I put that in the limitation section? I think that's important to put it there. But it's also important for me to put it somewhere else when I'm make that decision. Because I think not looking at the great literature also has a specific kind of slant on a
Right.
person's thinking as well.
Right, right. Gray literature is really, I think I might want to do a workshop on gray literature specifically as well, because it is such a big topic. And I mean big as in the scope of gray literature out there is enormous. And so it becomes really difficult if you want to do an extremely comprehensive review to not include gray literature. But it also becomes almost impossible to include all gray literature on the planet that relates to the topic that you're working on. So I've seen folks go both ways. I've seen them justify in their methods section, we did not include gray literature because X, Y, and Z. I've seen folks in their methods section say, we included gray literature, but we only searched this, and this places because our team expertise led us to those sources. I wouldn't say either of those are wrong. There might be more methodological guidance that comes from that in the future. But for right now, I would say in the methods section, identifying exactly where you searched, if you do search gray literature areas, or if you say you decided not to, providing a justification for that. But you're right, I think either way, there's a limitation, right? And so again, I think transparency about why you chose the decision that you did is kind of the best route. Hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did.
Okay, great. And I'm happy to provide, like I recently worked with a PhD student who's finishing up a systematic review, and she was like feeling stressed about how to find gray literature and how to talk about why she chose the sources that she did. And so we looked at some examples of different reviews that had included it and how they talked about it. So I'm happy to provide those examples or like strategize with you about, what method is best for you in that case as well. Other questions? Okay, awesome. All right. So now I want to talk about how you know which review type is right for you. I think probably going through the steps helps with this, but I want to kind of just hammer it home that there are several considerations to think about when you are deciding what review type is right. The first is time. So as you've heard, these take a long time. And I think it's important to ask yourself, do I have the time to complete a systematic or scoping review? If not, maybe a rapid review is the right way to go. Although, like I said, I haven't seen those quite as much in the social sciences. But I would be happy to strategize this with you. There's even on the LibGuide a time predictor that will help you identify how long your review might take. I think it's under types of evidence synthesis. Yes. There is a time predictor for evidence synthesis, little quiz that helps you kind of understand which, or what length your review might end up being. Then there's the team, can you identify teammates? Do you have folks that you can think of that would fill in the gaps for the different expertises that you need to complete a review? And will they have time to do the work needed to, especially during the screening process? Work through those sources. Resources, do you have the tools available to you? So we're really lucky at Rutgers to have access to a lot of different reference management tools. But I think especially for graduate students, it's important to think about the future with, what you might lose access to after you graduate. A lot of libraries now are getting subscriptions to Covidence, which is the big screening tool from Cochrane. We don't have a subscription to that. There are a lot of workarounds to that, but that might be a consideration as well. If you decide to incorporate articles that are in languages other than English, do you have reliable translation tools available to you? And then lastly, comprehensiveness. So I think one thing that folks forget to ask themselves a lot, because these methods are so popular and it's a new method. There's a lot of interest, but I think you need to ask yourself, is it essential that I gather every bit of evidence on the topic that I'm considering? Because there's no shame in writing a literature, a really well-written, comprehensive quality literature review if that makes more sense for your project. So always, remember to ask that of yourself too. And I'm happy to consult on what the scope of your project needs to look like as well. So on the LibGuide, I pointed to what type of review is right for your project. There are some resources here, but I just wanted to point one out, which is from Cornell University Library. It is a really nice little decision tree. Let me zoom in a little bit just so you can take a gander at this. It like asks you all the different factors that we just talked about and allows you to kind of conclude nicely, quickly about what might be the best method for you. So if you need a quick way to think about what type might be right, this is a good way to do it. Questions about what review type is right for you? Okay, awesome. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about how I can help you. Hopefully, I've given you plenty of examples as to, where my expertise is and what I can help you with in your review project. But I wanted to just go over that more explicitly as well. So librarians are consistently connected to higher quality systematic reviews. I've included some sources to kind of back that up. But having a librarian lend their expertise, whether in just an advisory capacity or as part of a team, is consistently being considered highly advisable by some of those big players that we mentioned, like JBI and Cochrane. So, sorry, check the chat here. Yeah, so Dr. Kim, if Covidence is not subscribed to by Rutgers, what software do you recommend? There are several options in the guide. A couple of them are free. I generally recommend using like EndNote if you don't have access to any kind of more devoted to screening type tool. There's also Rayan, which I haven't personally used, but I included it because a lot of other libraries recommend it as a free tool. Then there's also like the spreadsheet approach, which I also haven't used. I've only used EndNote or Covidence, working with teams who've paid for Covidence. But yeah, those are kind of the main things. I would say reference manager is most common when you don't have Covidence as well. Yeah. I wish we had Covidence. All right, other questions? Okay, cool. So, it's fee-based for, okay, gotcha. I did not know that. I'll put that in the LibGuide, thank you. Yeah, and I'm guessing for a lot of folks, you need that full capacity capability to, yeah, gotcha. Well, we can definitely, if you want to strategize like using EndNote or talk about other options, I'm happy to do that. Yeah. So anyway, I offer kind of 2 tiers, consultation or collaboration, and this is in line with what RBHS is doing and what other academic libraries are doing. So for consultation, it's basically what it sounds like. I consult with you. I provide instruction on doing different aspects of the review. I can talk you through scoping your project, offering advice with databases, that sort of good stuff. And then I have the collaboration tier, which is where I join your team as a co-author and actually will, write the method section for you, write the search strategy, all that good stuff. One caveat is that I am one person. So I kind of have to be pretty limited with the collaboration tier. But that is an option that you're welcome to inquire about and that I would be happy to consider if it's a good fit. So this is in the LibGuide under how can my librarian help? And it really breaks down nicely what you get for different tiers as well. So any questions about that, how I can assist you? Oh, great. Thank you, Dr. Kim. I'm glad. Awesome. All right. Last call for questions. And I'm pretty pleased with how we stayed on time. Yeah, Natalie.
Sorry, one more question here. So, in looking at the flow chart that you showed a minute ago, like the second question is, do you have like a team? Oh, sorry, the decision tree. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
If you're doing this, say like for a particular scenario, say like a dissertation, you get to the second question and it's like, no, don't do this if you don't have a team. So what do you do if you're thinking about this for a dissertation? So thanks.
Right. And I know for social work, right, you all get the option of writing a systematic, is it a systematic or scoping or just systematic?
I'm not entirely sure that specificity.
I'm doing a scoping, so I think it's either or.
Gotcha. Okay. I think maybe it's Jordan, I think also is doing scoping. So yeah, I've helped with a lot of those. Maybe some of the social work faculty can contribute to this because my perspective is that when you write it for your dissertation, you have a lot of your like your advisor or your committee members or other folks involved in your dissertation kind of as like pseudo team members. They should be giving a lot of feedback onto different elements of the review, for instance, the screening. So while this isn't a traditional team, I think that the intention for doing a scoping or systematic review for your dissertation is that you still have kind of that body of support around you to help you make those decisions and kind of eliminate the bias. I would be happy to hear from other folks who might have more perspective on this. You know, I personally have worked pretty closely with a couple folks now who are doing them for their dissertation. So happy to lend my expertise there as well. But yeah, I think we have a couple thoughts on that. Lorraine, I think your hand was up first.
I'll defer to Dr. Farmer because mine's a different question.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, in listening to you talk, Julia, perhaps there might need, and maybe I don't teach in the doctoral program, so maybe something is already available, but maybe there is some guide that could be written up that will help students who are thinking about doing this for the dissertation. Because what you just told me was, you know, they really have to think about critically about what if they want to do it. They should be constantly in contact with their chair and the committee members to help them with the screening process, it seems. And there might be some other things that individuals the dissertation team committee may need to know. Yeah,
I agree. And that's why I'm super glad that y'all are here and contributing your perspectives, because this is one of those things that we can build out as a more substantial support for those doctoral students that are deciding to write them. So a guide would be great, or maybe some instruction sessions with me, you know, maybe we pre-schedule some meetings, that sort of thing as well. Yeah. Dr. Kim, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just put something on the chat box. So the PhD Executive Committee recently addressed this in the meeting. So we are aware that some students are very interested in or still already working on some sort of a scoping or just beyond the narrative literature review. So we did discuss about and then also provide some sort of guideline about, because this is really unusual actually, because you definitely cannot do it on your own. You need a team member. So I think, as far as I remember, the basic guideline is that as long as the PhD students who's doing the dissertation can lead the team, right, and then do all the writing, right? But again, when it comes to publication, the team members can be on the publication, right. But when it comes to dissertation, they have to be the sole author of the dissertation.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You know, if there's a publication that comes out of the dissertation, maybe the team approach is more elevated in that particular venue. But yeah, I think, Natalie, thank you for raising that, because I think it's a bigger question that we can all think about. And I hope we at least semi-addressed it. Lorraine, did you want to? Yeah, don't want to.
Yeah. So my question was, because in my, I guess, research, if you were looking into the scoping review, I came across the rapid review. And so I was wondering if the dissertation, one of the things the person had wrote in there, because they were doing the rapid review because of the time frame for them. And so I was wondering, for dissertation stuff, would a rapid review be something people consider for that purpose as well? Or does it have to be, other things considered to do a rapid?
I think that it would be within the scope of kind of what the dissertation entails, at least to my understanding. And you're in social work as well, right, Lorraine? Okay, at least to my understanding, it sort of is a rapid review in a sense, because you don't have that team structure quite as much. And the timeline looks a little different, right? You have kind of a definitive end date that you need to defend your dissertation. So I would say that yes, some of those methodologies come into play in the shortening of the timeline. But again, I think it's really important to kind of bring together the expertise of your committee, of your advisor, of other folks that are engaged, of me, if you so need it, to really make sure that you're still following best practices as you can fit them within the dissertation kind of model. Yeah, so short answer, yes, I think rapid reviews fit within that. Long answer, I think it's a bigger scoping conversation to have with all the folks that are kind of in your corner when you're writing. Other questions? We're at 5:30 as well, so if folks need to head out, no worries. Yeah, Dr. Farmer.
This is not a question, but this is just, I really appreciate the thoroughness of this discussion, and you really have made me think more about, specifically thinking about working with doctoral students, the need for some kind of guide to be developed.
Yeah.
So that the critical piece is, to me, the team approach, right? You want to make sure you have people on your team that also have done these scoping reviews, right? That, to me, that's very critical.
It is. You need that guidance. I don't know how folks embark on this without having people that have done it before. It's almost impossible, I think, to do it without folks in your corner that are experienced. Yeah. Maybe we need to talk. Maybe I can email you and we can talk more about what this structure might look like. Because I think that this could be a really nice place to bring some of this learning to the doctoral students that are considering this.
And it could be a really, well, jumping ahead, this could be a really nice article, right? If you laid it up, the conceptual framework for guiding doctoral students and how to do a scoping review for their dissertation. And I think that provide value for a lot of students in the social sciences.
Yes, I agree. And that's what part of what I'm hoping to get from these workshops is that I can share what we're doing here with other social science librarians elsewhere, because there's just not a lot out there for how we're supporting social science folks in any capacity with evidence synthesis. There's like 3 articles that exist. So yeah, I think that that's a really great partnership to develop and to think about. Yeah, be super interested in talking more about it.
Okay, that sounds fantastic to me.
Great, yay.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, everybody, I know we're a little over. You're welcome, everyone that's in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. I think this was really fruitful, and I'm so happy that it seems like y'all gained some knowledge from it. I put a quick survey in the chat. I'll also send it out to everyone with the recording. Again, this is for me to understand how this went, where we can go from here, how we can structure workshops in the future. So please feel free to work on that. And here's my contact info again as well.